This part is a little bit tricky, so I want you to give yourself a little patience on this because there's a couple steps, and if you've done spawning before, you know that this requires a little bit of patience to understand the steps. For ease, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my player 1 character. I just want to have them out of the way of the base. I'm going to bring them right here, and I'm going to turn them a little bit so we can take a look at them from this side. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to create 3 objects. The first object is going to be a sphere. This is going to be our dodgeball. An easy solution, as suggested by them, is to change the scale. Just doing that manually and saying I'd like it to change to 50, 50, and 50. Centimeters is my default that I have. If you do inches, whatever works for you. The second object that we're going to put in, this is special, and in the special category, we're looking for our spawner object. And so we're going to take this, and we're just going to place it right here for now. And the third one we're going to add is called a variable. And as many people know, variables are a way of storing information, and it can be changed. So what we're going to use this variable and spawner and the ball to do is we're going to limit how many balls you can carry at a time. So we're going to let you carry up to 3. We're going to spawn those balls from the spawner, which is going to be attached to your hand, so that it will automatically be in your hand ready to go. And we're going to make the red ball actually appear, so that when we throw it, we'll see it, and we'll see it go through the air. And then it's going to deduct from our variable how many balls we've thrown. When we run out of balls to throw, later on we're going to create an area where you can respawn or kind of re-up your variable to pick up more balls. And this is a really interesting way of spawning things. If you're doing a game where in a battle royale you want to add more objects, I picked up this object and now I'm carrying it. This is a good way to go about it. So let's start with our sphere. And the first thing we need to do is create an event. And the event we're going to put in here is going to be if it hits a target. So we're going to choose the option called hit target, which is under interaction. This is what happens when the ball hits one of the other players. Now, the question is, what if it hits one of our own players? Should be kind of crossing your mind. We're going to set those conditions by clicking on and we're going to say first that the target must be the player. Target is player. Okay? We also want to make sure that we hit another and that we say specifically the target is not on my team. And so to check that, what you're going to do is you're going to go to the team part and you're going to choose target not on my team. And this will ensure that if the ball hits somebody that's, in this case, on the red team, it won't do any damage. As long as it's only hitting a blue team or any other team, we're in good shape. And then what we want to do is say that particular target, that thing that it hit, which is another player, it should take some damage. And so what you do is in your actions, you're going to say take damage. And what do we want to do? Well, we want it to create a 10-point damage. Remember, our hit points were set to 10. One hit is going to be all it takes to knock our player out. You can adjust this so that if you want to make it so that they have to get hit twice or 3 times, depending on how you're designing your game, you can do that. We need one more event for this, and we're going to hit Add New Event. And this is going to be, again, an example of hitting the target. So we're going to go to Interaction and choose Hit Target. This is what happens to the ball itself. Okay, that's why we're choosing the word myself. We want it to destroy the object. And what destroy object does is it basically takes this ball and makes it disappear after it's hit the other person. So we don't want the ball to stay intact in this case. Now that's possible that you could change that later on. So like in true dodgeball, the ball falls and then you would have to create a system where another player could pick that ball up. But that gets a little complicated because remember, if another person on the opposite side picks it up, then they're going to immediately take hit points. And that's not really how dodgeball works. So for now, we're going to leave it simple. The next thing we want to do is we want to choose the object that's going to go on the spawner. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on our spawner. And it's always asking us, well, what is the object that we're going to spawn? And so under spawning here, we're going to choose object. And we get this little arc. And what it does is it lets you pick an object. We're going to pick our red ball. As soon as I click on it, it disappears because it's now become part of the spawner itself. So it's not gone, it's just waiting to be spawned. We're going to then choose our variable, and our variable needs to have a value. Remember we said we're going to keep track of how many balls you can carry at a time. We're only going to allow them in their initial value to have 3 balls. So when you clicked on the variable in object, you'll see a section down in the text box for initial value, and that's where you're going to type in 3. And this is going to set it then to automatically spawn this variable with 3. And then from there, what we're going to do is I want to put it somewhere that's going to be visible to my player, because what's going to happen is in a little bit, we're going to want to be able to see this, and it's going to be essentially floating out in front of my player. So we kind of want it to be facing the direction that the player would be looking. And that's why you see me kind of putting it right here. This seems like a reasonable eye line for my player. It's important to note that you don't want it to actually get in the way of the spawn ball, because it will be treated like a target. So that means that your ball would hit that 3, it would just immediately disappear, and we don't want that. This will always stay kind of just in your peripheral vision and not be a problem. Once we have set up our spawner, and we also want to make sure that we turn on curved path. One of the reasons that the curved path is nice is that it gives that arcing effect. Rather than things moving in a perfect straight line, we want it to kind of follow the inertia that we would expect and the gravity that's going to pull it back down. Once you have your spawn value, now what we need to do is we're going to click on our variable. And this time what we need to do is go to our events section, and we're going to do add a new event. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that whenever this particular event happens, we want to change the amount of the number of balls that we're carrying. Well, what we're going to do in this one is kind of an interesting thing we may have not used before, and this is where we're going to do a global message. This is under interface, and you hit the little plus button, and it will bring a pop-up. And I'm going to call this reload. This is my own, I'm making this up from scratch. And so I'll say OK. And then now it knows that I'm doing this special global message called reload. And what I'd like it to do is say turn myself, my variable, into a number. And that number has to be what they call a set2, which is under variable, set2. And the amount that we're going to stick to is 3. So what this means is that later on, when we call for this reload command, it's going to call up a change to the variable to move it back to 3. And that'll make sense a little bit later when we're spawning brand new balls to throw. And then we're going to add a new event. And this is going to be called an interaction start. So when some kind of movement begins, we're going to add a second interaction if statement here. And in this case, what we want to say has to do with its value. So we'll see if the value in here is either greater than or equal to 1 in this case. And what 1 is indicating is as long as we still have a ball, then the other object that we're going to use, and that's where we're going to select then other object, our spawner, the thing that's going to create the ball, it should, once we click on it, it should spawn an object. And so that means that you'll have to go over to your spawner option, choose spawn object, and we actually want to send it through the air. So this launch power, if it's set to 0, it's just going to stay put. I'm going to move this up to a 2. And what this is going to do is it's going to give it an arc. You can see now in my blue line coming out of here, this is the direction that it's going to flow. If you feel like it's not going far enough and you want to play with this and adjust it, you can put it to faster, further. You can make it drop a little bit shorter. I'm just going to leave it around the 2.0 mark, and we'll see how that works out. We need one more step. And that means that we have to add another then statement, and that means clicking on the plus button. And for this, we're going to say the myself, and we're going to use the math of plus or equals to, and we're going to use the number of -1. Now, what does this mean? This is saying that as soon as this spawned ball happens, it's going to launch through the air. it should then change the value of my variable. That's the myself. We're still talking about our variable box here. And what it's going to say is, I want you to do some kind of addition or subtraction to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add a -1, aka subtracting 1. That's going to change this number down to a 2 on my first launch, then a 1 on my second launch, and then a 0 on my third launch. And that's a good way of us being able to keep track of how many balls we're throwing, and we're good to go. Now, the final thing you're going to want to do is you're going to collect these two objects. We're going to have our variable selected, and we're also going to hold control and collect our spawner. And what I'm going to do is I want to group these objects together. And the reason that we're going to group them is that later on you're going to probably want to make some adjustments to this. But if you adjust something on here, you have to adjust it for all of the spawned events for all of the players, which gets really, really confusing. So one of the best things to do is to lock everything together into this one little object. And then what we can do is we can duplicate it. So we're going to make a second copy. And what they suggest is that you go somewhere like outside your arena and you just park this out of view. This way, if you want to make adjustments, you can take this version, make some adjustments to it, and you can easily drag it in and make the change needed to your object that it's going to connect to. So it makes a lot of sense to just really quickly throw it in there. This way, what you can do is, now that we still have our original one, I'm going to click on it once. And then what we want to do this time is I'm going to click on my player 1. And then when I click on player 1, in their primary hand, I'm going to say add object. And I can point to my spawner. You can now see that that little spawner piece is attached to the body of my character. This means is the ball will be spawned from my player's primary hand in order to be thrown, which is very, very cool. And then what I can do is I can turn this character around, make sure that I'm comfortable with the direction he's facing, and I'm going to place it back inside this little base. And now I have the ability with player 1 to spawn an object that is a ball that I'm going to throw. You want to make this work for anybody. And so one of the coolest features is when you're still clicking on your character in the object, Blocksmith has an option down here called Apply to All Players. When you click on it, it's going to confirm, are you sure you want all these settings to work for any multiplayer character? And for now, we're going to say yes. And this means that now your player 2, the blue team people over here, also received a spawner with all of these settings in it. And that is a huge, huge time saver. So it's a really great feature to have. Once you've got all of these pieces in, the next most obvious thing to do is try this out. So we're going to hit play. And we're going to pretend to be player 1. And as you can see, I'm behind my base. And you can also see that my number 3 down there, it gets cut off a little bit when I look up. So it's up to you if you want to make an adjustment to that. But what's really cool about this is, as you can see, I'm now out in the field. I'm going to take my target white dot. I'm going to point it, and now I'm going to click. And you can see my ball goes flying through the air. And when it eventually comes to a collision with the ground, it disappears. Every time I've clicked on it, my number has gone down. And now when I try to click a new one, nothing happens. Because we're at 0, there's no more balls left for me to throw.